Your textbook gave you one sentence about Nubia, one sentence, and then it moved on to Egypt. That is the gap I want to pull open with you tonight. Not to argue, to show you what the ground holds. The soil of the Upper Nile Valley is not silent. It speaks in pottery sherds and burial mounds and carved ivory labels and the carbonized grain of storerooms that were already sophisticated when the first Egyptian king had not yet picked up a writing tool. What they called the land of Ta-Seti, the land of the bow, was not a borderland. It was a source. Walk with me into that source tonight. Because the kings buried at Qustul were wearing crowns before Memphis had a throne room, and the world has spent 2,000 years pretending not to notice. Stand at the site of Qustul with me. This is southern Nubia, modern Sudan, right at the modern border where Egypt and Sudan shake hands across the desert. In 1962, an Oriental Institute team led by Keith Seal broke ground on Cemetery L at Qustul. They were racing the rising water of Lake Nasser. The Aswan High Dam was coming, and everything beneath the waterline was going under. What they pulled from that cemetery before the flood took it permanently was not trinkets. It was an incense burner, a carved stone tableau, and on that tableau a king in a white crown, seated on a throne receiving tribute with a falcon hovering above him. That falcon is Horus, the icon of divine kingship that every Egyptology textbook tells you was born in the Delta. The date on that incense burner is 3400 before Christ. Egypt's first dynasty did not begin until 3100. You do the arithmetic. 300 years. That is not a footnote. That is a generation of grandfathers. The Qustul incense burner predates the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt by 3 full centuries, and it is already showing the complete iconographic language of pharaonic kingship. The white crown, the seated ruler, the Horus falcon, the procession of bound captives. Bruce Williams of the Oriental Institute published his analysis in 1980 in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies and made the argument plainly: the origin of the Egyptian royal tradition moved north, not south. He was calling what he found the A-group culture, the A-group kings of Nubia. They were not borrowing from Egypt. Egypt was downstream from them, in every sense of that word. Now hear what the mainstream said back. They called it overclaiming. They called Williams an outlier. The journal ran rebuttals. Archaeologists with careers invested in a Nile Delta origin of pharaonic culture were not quiet about their objections. I also understand what the ground said before anyone published an opinion about it. The ground said 3400 before Christ. The ground said white crown. The ground said Horus. The ground said Ta-Seti. And the ground does not have a career to protect. A black African kingdom on the Upper Nile was already performing the rituals of divine monarchy 3 centuries before the civilization the world calls Egypt had a unified state. That is not an outlier finding. That is the dirt speaking. Follow me north now, because the story does not stop at Qustul. The city of Kerma rises in your sightline around 2500 before Christ, deep in what is today northern Sudan. Kerma was a capital, not a village, not a trade post, a capital. The main temple structure, the Defufa, its Nubian name, stood 19 meters tall, a solid mud brick tower that has survived 4,500 years of Saharan wind. The German archaeologist Georg Reisner excavated Kerma in the early 20th century and did something scholars rarely celebrate. He found burials of Nubian kings surrounded by human sacrifice. Hundreds of retainers buried alive with their lords. He found Egyptian luxury goods by the ton, not as evidence of Egyptian superiority, but as tribute. The Kerma culture lasted 900 years. 900! Their kings wore gold. Their craftsmen produced faience inlay work that Egyptian artisans of the same period could not replicate in technique or volume. The royal tumuli at Kerma are among the largest pre-industrial earthworks on the African continent. And at the centre, the king. Always the king, laid out in the posture of a man who had not finished ruling. These were not subjects of Egypt. These were rivals of Egypt. Sometimes they were conquerors of Egypt. Turn your eyes to the second intermediate period, 1650 to 1550 before Christ. Egypt is fractured. The Hyksos, Canaanite-descended migrants, have taken the delta. The pharaonic court has retreated to Thebes, and in that moment of Egyptian weakness, the Kerma kingdom drives north and occupies the entire stretch from the Third Cataract to the First. The Nubian king Apetamak's precursor dynasties are in direct control of territory that Egyptian textbooks label as Egyptian. They are not governing from a distance. Kerma soldiers are garrisoning Egyptian forts. Kerma administrators are reading the tax rolls. For a full century, a black African dynasty out of Sudan holds the southern half of what we call ancient Egypt. Your textbook's one sentence did not mention that, did it? Now widen the lens further, because what happens after the Kerma period is where the story turns into something that fills you with a grief and a pride that sit right next to each other. Egypt recovers under the new kingdom. Thutmose I drives the Kerma state back. Egypt colonizes Nubia. They build their temples on Nubian soil. They install Egyptian governors in Nubian cities. They demand Nubian gold for 400 years. And then something shifts. The new kingdom collapses inward. The Ramesside period ends. The priests of Amun at Thebes are wielding as much power as the pharaoh. The Delta dynasties are fragmenting. Egypt, the empire, is coming undone. And to the south, a kingdom is rising again. Its capital is Napata. Its kings call themselves sons of Amun. And they are watching Egypt, the way a patient man watches a door he was told he could never open. The man who opens it is named Piye. Stand with me in 747 before Christ at the temple of Amun at Gebel Barkal, the holy mountain of the Napatan kingdom. Piye is not a general mounting a raid. He is a pharaoh performing a religious obligation. He believes Egypt belongs to Amun. He believes the Libyan-descended rulers sitting on the Delta thrones have polluted the house of the god. He moves north with an army and a theology. His victory stele, which you can stand in front of today in the Cairo Museum, records the campaign in 159 lines of hieroglyphic text. 159 lines. It is one of the longest historical inscriptions from the ancient world. The Libyan kings of Egypt kneel to him one by one. Memphis falls. Hermopolis surrenders. And Piye does something the stele records with a bevious relish. He refuses to eat with the conquered Delta kings. They are ritually impure. He, the Nubian, is the righteous one. The 25th dynasty that Piye founded ruled Egypt for nearly a century. His successors, Shabaka, Shebitku, Taharqa, Tanutamun, these are not client kings or military governors. They are pharaohs, full pharaohs, building temples at Karnak, restoring the pyramids their ancestors built at Nuri and El Kuru, commissioning art that Egyptologists now describe as among the most refined of the late period. Taharqa's name appears in the Bible, in 2 Kings chapter 19, as the king the Assyrians were afraid of. He built a colonnade at Karnak whose single surviving pillar stands 21 meters tall. He dug a sacred lake at the Temple of Mut. He constructed chapels the length of the Nile from Kawa in Sudan to the delta edge of Egypt. This man was not ruling a footnote. He was running the most powerful African state on earth. The first time I read the full text of Piye's victory stele, not a summary, not a paragraph in a survey textbook, the actual 159 lines, I had to stop reading twice. That is what breaks you open when you finally hold the full document. You realize that everything you were handed about the direction of civilization on the Nile was a river run backwards. They let you see the water. They just never told you which way it was flowing. Taharqa's face looks back at you today from the walls of Karnak. His royal statues in the Nubian Museum at Aswan show a man with unmistakably sub-Saharan African features. High cheekbones, wide nose, the face of the Sudan, and below the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon calls him in his own annals the King of Egypt and Kush. Not King of Kush, who temporarily occupied Egypt, King of Egypt. The ancient world knew what it was looking at. It named it accurately. The 25th dynasty ended when Assyrian military pressure finally pushed Tanutamun south out of Memphis around 664 before Christ. But the Napatan kingdom did not collapse. It retreated to Meroe and kept building pyramids for another 900 years. 255 pyramids. More pyramids than Egypt ever raised, on African soil. By African hands, by the descendants of the kings who wore the white crown at Qustul before Egypt had a name.